I was 16 when I was thrown out of my home, all because my twin sister had gotten pregnant. From the beginning, I'd known I was the unwanted one. Not in the oops, a surprise baby way, but in the way where my parents actually admitted they wished they had only one child, and that child was my sister, Emily. I was the spare, the background actor in the story of my own life. Growing up felt like living in someone else's house. Emily was the star. Every corner of the house celebrated her. Her room had bright walls, soft pink curtains, and shelves filled with toys I couldn't even imagine. I had a cramped little room, furnished with a creaky bed and a dresser that seemed older than I was. Every morning was a reminder. My parents would talk excitedly about Emily's dance classes or the new outfit they bought her, while I faded into the wallpaper, expected to stay out of the way. "Why can't you be more like her?" was a phrase I heard so often it might as well have been my name. School was no refuge. At parent-teacher nights, they gushed over Emily's drawings and never glanced at my report card. I pushed myself, thinking if I worked hard enough, maybe they'd notice. But I was invisible. Even meals reinforced it. Emily got the first pick, the biggest slice, the best cut. I got what remained. If I complained, my mother would give me a look that said, "Be grateful you're getting anything at all." The only person who made me feel like I mattered was my grandfather. His house was my refuge on weekends. His stories and quiet encouragement made me feel human. But when he fell ill, my parents shielded me, telling me I had chores or homework while Emily visited him with gifts. When he passed, my family barely acknowledged my grief. Emily stood at the forefront while I melted into the background. The resentment built slowly, quietly, shaping me into someone who learned to disappear. Every comment about being lazy, selfish, or not enough forced me further into the shadows. Even when I tried to advocate for myself, I was dismissed. My father's favorite line, "Shape up, son. Why can't you be more like Emily?" burned like acid in my ears. And Emily? She played the part, crying or whining when it served her, making sure I was never the center of attention. I grew up thinking I was the problem, that my very existence was an inconvenience. Then everything shifted at 16. Emily got pregnant, her boyfriend barely out of high school, working dead-end jobs. When my parents found out, I expected outrage, lectures, consequences. Instead, there was excitement, like she had won a prize. A shotgun wedding followed quickly, and suddenly, my room, the only corner of the house I had, was needed for the baby. I was left scrambling. They told me to figure it out, as if a 16-year-old could simply vanish into thin air. I grabbed an old tent from the garage, set it up in the backyard, and endured nights of biting cold, trying to focus on school under the dim beam of a flashlight. Winter was relentless, and every meal I scavenged felt like a victory. I worked odd jobs, mowing lawns and shoveling snow, surviving on scraps and day-old bread. The worst part wasn't the cold or hunger, it was the knowledge that if my grandfather had lived, this wouldn't have happened. I was utterly alone. Then came Frank, the bakery owner. He saw something in me that no one else did. A kid, abandoned, struggling, but determined. He offered me work, sweeping floors, cleaning, running errands, and slowly I found a purpose. I learned to knead dough, make bread, even whip up pies. He wasn't warm, but he was steady, and he trusted me enough to give me a room above the bakery. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt seen, valued. I threw myself into this new life, saving every penny, learning responsibility, and for the first time, planning a future. I was building something for myself, not waiting for anyone to hand it to me. Every day I reminded myself, I wouldn't let my past define me. I wouldn't let the family that cast me aside dictate my life anymore. As months passed, the bakery became more than just a job. It became my lifeline. I woke up before sunrise, worked hard, and at night I'd retreat to my little room above the shop. Every loaf I kneaded, every pie I baked, reminded me that I was building something real for myself. Frank, in his gruff way, gave me lessons in more than just baking. He taught me discipline, resilience, and the quiet strength of doing honest work. Some days, I'd watch families walk in, parents laughing with kids, and I'd feel a pang of longing. But instead of letting it pull me down, I let it remind me why I was fighting, why I had to keep moving forward. Soon, I realized I needed more. Working at the bakery wasn't going to be enough. I picked up extra shifts at a convenience store and weekends doing landscaping. Every dollar I earned went straight into savings. I lived frugally, surviving on day-old bread and canned goods, pushing myself to endure so I could one day escape this cycle of dependency and invisibility. Over the years, I started seeing progress. The tent in the backyard was long gone, replaced by a stable income and the security of my small room. I could finally envision a life that wasn't dictated by the whims of my family. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted to thrive. I wanted a place I could truly call my own. After years of saving, I finally bought a small house on the outskirts of town. It wasn't lavish, but it was mine. Walking through the empty rooms, I felt a rush of pride and relief. No one could push me out now. No one could decide my worth. I furnished it slowly, each piece an achievement, each addition a symbol of my independence. Then, years later, they showed up. My parents, Emily, her husband, and their 3 children, standing on my doorstep, smiling as if nothing had happened. My chest tightened. Their timing was predictable. They only ever came around when they needed something. My mom, with her fake smile, said, "We heard you bought a house." "We're proud of you, Emily," pushing forward with her kids in tow, appraised the space like a realtor. And then my father, with a faux warmth, suggested, "Maybe it's time we all lived together again." One big, happy family, I froze for a second, a mix of disbelief and rage swirling inside me. This was the home I had built from nothing, the sanctuary I had earned with every drop of sweat and every sleepless night. And now they thought they could just walk in and claim it as their own. "No," I said, my voice firm. "That's not happening." They faltered, confused. "But we're family," my mom insisted. "We should help each other out." "Where was family when I was 16 and living in a tent in the backyard?" I asked. "Where was the help then?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face reddened, his usual intimidation faltering. I continued, "I built this place on my own. I worked every day to get here, and I will not let you waltz in like nothing ever happened. This is my home. You are not welcome here." Emily tried to guilt me, her voice dripping with false hurt. "You owe us." "Don't be selfish," I snapped. "I owe you nothing. You threw me out, left me with nothing, and now you think you can just take over? Get out." For a moment, I saw their shock. Perhaps they realized I wasn't that timid child anymore. I was done being invisible, done being manipulated. I had my life, my independence, and I wasn't giving it away. When they finally left, I leaned against the door, hands shaking, a strange mix of anger, relief, and empowerment washing over me. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from their control, free from their judgment, free to live life on my own terms. For a few weeks, I thought that confrontation had closed the chapter. I had my house, my routines, and a sense of peace I'd never known. But toxic people have a way of worming back into your life, even when you've slammed every door. One afternoon, I came home from work to find an official-looking envelope in the mailbox. My stomach sank. It was a legal notice. My sister was trying to contest my ownership of the house, claiming it should be shared as family property. I stared at the letter, stunned. My first instinct was disbelief. How could they be so audacious? They had thrown me out, tried to erase my existence, and now they wanted to take the one thing I had built? I called my lawyer, Karen, a no-nonsense woman with a sharp mind and zero patience for manipulation. She assured me, they have no leg to stand on, but they'll try to make it a hassle. And make it a hassle, they did. For weeks, my parents launched a relentless campaign. They painted me as the villain, claimed I had exploited their generosity, and spun lies to anyone who would listen. Old friends, distant relatives, they all received versions of the story portraying me as ungrateful and deceitful. For a moment, I felt like that invisible kid again, the one always dismissed, always wrong. But I wasn't that kid anymore. I refused to let them control my life or rewrite history. I gathered every document, receipts from jobs I'd worked, bank statements, proof that I had saved and earned every penny to buy my home. I asked Karen to dig deeper, and the truth came out, something that shook me to my core. It turned out that after my grandfather died, he had left me an inheritance meant for my 18th birthday. But my parents had manipulated the system, taking control of the money through loopholes. They used it to pay off debts, fund my sister's wedding, and even support their own lifestyle. Every night I spent shivering in a tent, every day I worked jobs to survive. They had been living off what was rightfully mine. Anger surged through me. Anger at them, but also at myself for trusting, for hoping they might care. They had never loved me. I was just a convenient source of money and nothing more. That revelation ignited something in me. a determination to reclaim what was mine and stand up for myself once and for all. Karen and I prepared the case meticulously. We documented the fraud, the misappropriation of funds, and their blatant attempts to undermine my rightful ownership. When the papers were served, the calls came flooding in. Pleas, excuses, apologies. But I ignored them all. No more games, no more manipulation. I was done being the child they could push around. The courtroom became my proving ground. They tried every trick: emotional manipulation, false claims, and gaslighting, but the evidence spoke louder than their lies. Every document I presented chipped away at their credibility. For the first time, I felt power and validation. I wasn't invisible, I wasn't powerless, I wasn't the problem. I was standing on solid ground, defending the life I had built. When the verdict finally came, relief and vindication washed over me. The judge ruled in my favor: my house, my money, and the damages were mine. Seeing my parents' stunned faces, knowing they couldn't manipulate or intimidate their way out this time, was a feeling I'll never forget. I felt a sense of justice I had craved for years. Not about revenge or money, but about recognition, about finally being seen for who I truly was. From that day forward, I didn't just feel independent. I was independent. My family's attempts to reconnect or apologize fell on deaf ears. I blocked them, cut off all contact, and focused on building my life. I had a home, a career, and a sense of self-worth that no one could take away. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, it felt like my road, not one dictated by people who never cared. I realized that family isn't defined by blood, but by who truly shows up for you. And for the first time, I was surrounded by people who chose to care, who supported me, and who recognized my value. I had endured betrayal, neglect, and manipulation, but I had also survived. I had fought, clawed, and built a life worth protecting. I was free, I was strong, and I was finally, unapologetically, mine. Life after cutting my family off wasn't instant bliss. Freedom came with its own challenges. Suddenly, I was responsible for everything: bills, groceries, maintenance, and keeping my life from falling apart. But for once, it was my life to manage, and that made all the difference. The first few months were a balancing act. I was still working at the bakery, picking up extra shifts wherever I could, and stretching every dollar to make ends meet. But I noticed something. Each day, I was getting stronger. Every challenge I faced wasn't a punishment from my past, it was a test of what I could handle. I was learning resilience in ways I'd never known before. I started investing in myself. I enrolled in night classes to finish my education, something my parents had never encouraged. I studied, not for approval, but for me. Each completed assignment, each passing grade, was a reminder that I could achieve anything I set my mind to. Slowly, the self-doubt that had haunted me since childhood began to fade. Socially, I became more cautious. Trust didn't come easily. Years of neglect had left scars, and I realized I needed to build a network of people who genuinely cared. I made friends who respected my boundaries and supported my goals. I learned to say no, to protect my space, and to value myself first. Every positive interaction reinforced that I deserved better than the treatment I had endured. Financially, I pushed myself to grow. With Frank's advice and my own determination, I started small investments, saving every possible dollar. I learned budgeting, planning, and the value of delayed gratification. The more I built, the more control I felt over my destiny. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. Emotionally, I worked on letting go of the past. Therapy helped me unpack decades of neglect, resentment, and self-blame. I realized my parents' actions were never about me. They were about their own flaws and selfishness. Understanding that gave me peace. Their approval would never define me again. My worth was self-determined. Years passed, and I turned my small house into a true home. Every choice, every detail reflected me. I furnished it with intention, decorated with care, and created a sanctuary where I could breathe freely. It wasn't just a roof over my head, it was a symbol of everything I had overcome. Then came the moment I truly felt the weight of my journey. I invited a few close friends over, people who had supported me along the way. We cooked together, laughed, shared stories, and for the first time in my life I felt surrounded by family, not by blood, but by love and respect. These people celebrated me, not what I could do for them. That realization hit harder than anything my parents ever did. I never regretted standing up to my family. Saying no to them wasn't cruelty, it was survival. I had built my life on my terms, and I refused to compromise that for anyone who had once treated me like a ghost. I realized that boundaries weren't just about keeping others out. They were about protecting what you had fought to achieve. And in that moment, I understood something crucial. Survival is only the beginning. Thriving requires courage, patience, and self-respect. Every brick in my house, every paycheck saved, every small victory over hardship was proof that I could take control, that I could define who I was without anyone else's permission or interference. I had finally broken free from the cycle of neglect. I had faced abandonment, betrayal, and hardship, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and capable. And for the first time, I felt truly at home in my own skin. Even with my life finally on track, echoes of the past would occasionally resurface. Sometimes I'd catch myself hesitating, doubting my decisions, or wondering if I was repeating patterns I had spent years trying to escape. It was natural, I told myself. Scars don't disappear overnight. But I learned to face those moments with clarity. I reminded myself of everything I had endured and, more importantly, everything I had overcome. I started exploring opportunities I never would have dared to imagine as a teenager. I took on freelance projects, invested in my skills, and even started a small side business. Every late night spent coding, designing, or planning budgets reminded me that independence wasn't just survival. It was creation. I was building a life that reflected my ambitions, not the expectations of people who never wanted me. Friendships grew deeper. People who truly cared about me became my chosen family. Birthdays, holidays, and milestones were no longer painful reminders of neglect. They were celebrations of hard-earned stability and genuine love. I learned to lean on those I trusted and, equally important, to give support in return. That balance, that exchange of respect and care, was something I had never experienced growing up. The anger I once carried toward my parents began to evolve. It didn't disappear, but it shifted. It became a quiet fuel, a reminder of what I refused to become. I promised myself that I would never use power over someone else to hurt them, as my parents had done to me. Instead, I channeled my energy into mentoring younger people who faced similar struggles, teaching them that their value wasn't defined by neglect, abuse, or the whims of others. One particularly reflective evening, I sat in my living room, looking around at my life. The house smelled faintly of fresh paint and baked bread from the small kitchen I'd restored. The furniture was modest but comfortable, filled with the warmth of intention and care. Sunlight spilled through the windows, and I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I had earned this. Every sleepless night, every shivering winter, every ounce of effort had led me here. I thought about my family one last time, not with longing, but with understanding. They were people who had shaped part of my story, but they did not define my future. The door I had shut was not a barrier of bitterness. It was a protection of the life I had fought for. I had created a space where I was safe, respected, and valued. That was something no one could take from me. And then, unexpectedly, a feeling of peace settled in. For years, I had chased approval that would never come, sought validation from people who could never give it, and doubted my worth at every turn. But now, I realized that the only approval I needed was my own. The only validation that mattered was the proof I could see in my own life, the home I had built, the skills I had mastered, and the resilience I had forged from fire. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Challenges arose, as they always do. There were bills, health scares, and moments of loneliness. But each time something tried to knock me down, I remembered how far I had come. The teenage boy who slept in a tent, who feared and doubted himself, who had once thought he was unwanted. He was gone. In his place stood someone capable, independent, and unshakable. I knew the road ahead was mine to pave. I didn't need to chase the approval of those who had abandoned me. I didn't need to measure myself against anyone else's standards. My journey was my own, and I had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that freedom, self-respect, and peace are earned through perseverance, courage, and an unwavering belief in yourself. Looking back now, I see everything differently. Every moment of pain, every insult, every night spent cold and hungry, it all became fuel. Fuel that drove me to rise above my circumstances, to build, to thrive, and to protect the life I had fought so fiercely to claim. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly unstoppable. A few months later, I received an unexpected message, one of those that could have shaken me, but didn't. It was from Sarah. She was apologetic, almost pleading, asking if we could talk. At first, I stared at the message, hand frozen over my phone. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Another part of me felt the pull of old memories, the temptation to confront the past directly. After a long night of reflection, I decided to respond, but on my terms. I didn't agree to meet, I didn't forgive or forget. I simply told her I had moved on, that my life was my own, and that any further attempts to insert herself into it would not be welcome. It wasn't a message of anger, though it could have been. It was a message of clarity and control. I wasn't going to relive the past or let anyone manipulate me with guilt or nostalgia. That chapter was closed. With that decision, something shifted. I realized that reclaiming my life wasn't just about physical space or financial independence. It was about mental freedom. Every choice I made now, every relationship I nurtured was guided by respect, reciprocity, and care. I had the power to shape my world, to choose who had access to it, and to protect myself from those who had never shown me genuine support. Work at the bakery had grown into more than just a job. I had become a trusted employee, a mentor to the younger apprentices, and even began experimenting with recipes that customers loved. I had a sense of ownership and pride that I had never experienced before. Every loaf of bread, every pastry, every perfectly glazed tart carried with it the weight of my journey, the proof that I could create something lasting, meaningful, and beautiful out of hardship. Soon, I started hosting small community events in the space I'd created. Local kids came in after school to learn baking, some struggling with challenges of their own, neglect, poverty, or simply lack of guidance. Watching them smile, seeing them achieve small victories, I realized that giving back in this way was healing. It was a way to transform my pain into something positive, to turn rejection into empowerment. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving, and I was helping others do the same. Over time, I became more than just the kid who had been unwanted. I became a figure of resilience in my neighborhood, someone people could rely on, someone who had turned adversity into opportunity. The fear of rejection that had haunted me for years began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence that I carried into every aspect of my life. I was no longer defined by the neglect of my parents or the mistakes of my sister. I was defined by my choices, my grit, and my determination. One evening, while closing the bakery, I stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. Snow was falling gently, and I thought about how different life could have been if I had never been pushed out, if I had never been forced to fight for myself. And then I realized something profound. Those hardships, as cruel as they were, had forged the person I had become. Every night in the tent, every cold winter, every moment of feeling invisible, it had all prepared me for this life. It had taught me resilience, independence, and self-worth. And now, as I stood there, I understood that the past didn't have to hold me back. It didn't have to dictate my future. I had a home, a career, friends, and a community that valued me. I had the ability to dream bigger, to plan further, and to live life on my terms. That realization, more than anything, was liberating. I smiled to myself, thinking of the years I had lost waiting for validation from people who would never give it. Those years weren't wasted. They were lessons. And the life I had built, step by step, moment by moment, was a testament to the power of perseverance and self-belief. I had turned every insult, every rejection, and every hardship into fuel for my journey. And for the first time, I truly believed that I could achieve anything I set my mind to. I didn't need anyone else to validate my existence. I didn't need anyone else to define my worth. I was enough. I had earned my place in the world, and no one could take that away from me. Months turned into years, and life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't imagined. I expanded the bakery, turning it into a small cafe where people could sit, enjoy a cup of coffee, and feel a sense of belonging. I hired a few employees, all of them young people trying to make their way in the world, and treated them the way I had always wished someone had treated me, with respect, patience, and encouragement. One day, a local journalist came in, intrigued by the transformation of the once tiny bakery into a thriving community hub. They asked me about my story, and I hesitated at first. Opening up about the years of neglect and hardship wasn't easy, but then I realized that sharing my journey could inspire others, maybe even save someone from feeling invisible like I had for so long. I spoke honestly about my struggles, the pain of being unwanted, and how I had turned that pain into motivation. The article ran in the local newspaper, and the response was overwhelming. People reached out with messages of support, and some even shared their own stories of being overlooked or mistreated. It was surreal to see how my experiences resonated with others. Financial stability followed slowly but steadily. I invested the money I had saved into expanding my skills, taking courses in business management and entrepreneurship. I wanted to ensure that my independence wasn't fragile, that I could continue building something meaningful for myself and others. Every day was still hard work, but now it carried purpose. I wasn't just surviving, I was creating, growing, and shaping the future I wanted. Then, one evening, as I was closing up, I saw a familiar face outside the cafe. It was an old friend from my school days, someone who had always recognized me even when my family didn't. They walked in, eyes wide as they looked around at the bustling cafe and the warmth of the space I had created. "Wow," they said, "you've really done it. This place, it's amazing." And in that moment, I realized that I had built something that didn't just belong to me, but also belonged to the community. It was proof that I could thrive without needing approval from those who had abandoned me. The bakery became a symbol of transformation. People came not just for the bread or pastries, but for the energy, the feeling of care, and the story behind the place. I had turned a life of rejection and struggle into a life of purpose and connection, and every time I saw a young person succeed, or a struggling family find comfort within those walls, I felt a quiet satisfaction that no one could take away. Of course, my family's shadow still lingered. Occasionally, I'd hear rumors, see distant glances when they came into town, or hear stories from mutual acquaintances. But it didn't shake me. I had learned the ultimate lesson. My life was mine. My happiness, my success, and my worth were no longer tied to people who never valued me. I had built my own foundation, and it was strong enough to weather anything. Years later, I expanded further, buying a second property where I could run workshops, mentoring sessions, and community events. I invited struggling kids, like the version of me who had once slept in a backyard tent, to learn not just baking, but life skills, financial literacy, and resilience. Watching them grow, seeing their confidence blossom, it became the most rewarding part of my journey. Through all of it, I learned something vital. Pain and neglect don't have to define you. They can fuel your rise, guide your choices, and sharpen your vision. I had been unwanted, overlooked, and pushed aside, but instead of letting that destroy me, I let it drive me. Every door slammed in my face, every insult, every act of neglect became a stepping stone to my independence. And in the quiet moments, when the cafe lights dimmed and the last customer had left, I would stand by the counter and think back to that 16-year-old boy in a tent, shivering and alone, wondering if he would ever have a life that mattered. I had come so far, and the distance between that past and my present filled me with a quiet pride. I had survived, I had grown, and most importantly, I had learned to protect my peace and claim my place in the world. I wasn't just the kid who was unwanted anymore. I was a man who had transformed hardship into strength, neglect into opportunity, and rejection into independence. And for the first time, I felt fully, completely, and unapologetically free. Life had a way of throwing unexpected tests even after the toughest battles were behind me. One crisp morning, I received a call from a distant relative I barely knew. They spoke cautiously, almost apologetically, and told me that my parents were in financial trouble. Their house had gone into foreclosure, and they were scrambling to keep things afloat. For a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of something unexpected. Was it pity? Curiosity? Maybe even a twinge of vindication? But I quickly reminded myself of the lessons I'd learned. I had been there before, and helping them now wouldn't erase the years of neglect or undo the damage they'd caused. I hung up without making a decision. It wasn't that I didn't feel a shred of empathy. I did. But empathy didn't mean sacrificing my hard-won independence. I had built a life from nothing, clawed my way out of the shadows, and I refused to let those who once abandoned me pull me back into chaos. I reminded myself that setting boundaries was not cruelty. It was survival. Around the same time, my cafe had started attracting more attention. People from neighboring towns would come for workshops, baking classes, and mentorship sessions. Word spread that this was more than a business. It was a sanctuary for people who had been overlooked, undervalued, or underestimated. Some of them reminded me so much of the boy I used to be, quiet, uncertain, and afraid to take up space. And each time I saw one of them succeed, take a step forward, or just smile knowing they were being seen, it felt like I was reclaiming pieces of my own lost childhood. One afternoon, a young girl walked in, shyly clutching a notebook. She reminded me of Sarah in her worst moments, entitled Demanding Attention, but also of myself at her age. Small, ignored, yearning for someone to notice. I invited her to help in the kitchen, guiding her hands as she kneaded dough. Slowly, she began to open up, telling me about her struggles at home, how she felt invisible to her parents. Her words hit me like a punch, echoing the feelings I had spent years burying. But instead of resentment, I felt a surge of purpose. I knew I couldn't change her parents, but I could offer her a safe space, validation, and guidance. That realization became my mission. Every misfit, every overlooked kid who walked through my doors deserved a mentor who could see their worth. Meanwhile, my sister's family occasionally tried to peek into my world, always with thinly veiled demands or reminders of past grievances. Once, they showed up at the cafe unannounced, expecting a warm reunion. I had to muster all the calm I'd developed over the years to face them without anger. They saw a successful, independent adult, someone who had built a life without their approval, and they didn't like it. But I didn't flinch. I had learned the power of presence without submission, of standing firm without needing to fight every battle. Business continued to grow, and with it, a sense of stability and pride I had never experienced as a teenager. I moved into a bigger house, but this time, it wasn't just about ownership. It was about creating a legacy. I wanted a home that reflected resilience, growth, and the possibility of second chances, not the toxic nostalgia of a family that had never truly been there. Then, one evening, I received an unexpected letter from my grandfather's old attorney. He had been managing some of the estate matters quietly over the years, and in it was a small but meaningful inheritance that had somehow been overlooked. A collection of letters my grandfather had written, addressed to me, never delivered. I sat down and began reading. They were filled with wisdom, encouragement, and pride, a reminder that even when the people around me failed, there was always someone who believed in me. Tears blurred my vision as I realized that love and validation had never truly been absent. I had only had to find it in the right places. As the years passed, the boy who had once been kicked out at 16 became a man who had turned neglect into purpose, rejection into resilience, and hardship into hope. I had created a life where I could stand tall, not by seeking approval from those who didn't care, but by building something that mattered to me and to others who felt invisible. I knew that family didn't always mean blood. It meant who chose to stand by you, who nurtured your growth, and who showed up when the world tried to push you aside. And finally, in the quiet moments of my home and cafe, surrounded by people who truly cared, I felt the deepest sense of belonging I had ever known. I had survived. I had thrived. And, more importantly, I had reclaimed the narrative of my life. The past could not hold me hostage anymore. I was the author of my own story, and I was determined to write it with courage, strength, and unwavering self-respect. Life had a strange way of testing the boundaries of my independence. Even after years of building a home and a business, I found that letting go of the past wasn't just about blocking out my family. It was about confronting the memories that haunted me in quieter, subtler ways. Some nights, I'd lie awake listening to the wind outside, and the shadows on the walls would bring back flashes of that 16-year-old kid in a tent, shivering, hungry, and invisible. The feelings of abandonment and anger would surge, reminding me of all the years I had been overlooked. But now, the difference was clear. I no longer felt powerless. I had tools to protect myself, financial stability, a safe home, and a strong sense of self. I realized that true independence wasn't just about surviving physically, it was about surviving emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The boy who had once believed he had no worth had grown into someone who knew his value. Around the same time, I began mentoring more young adults and teens, many of whom came from broken homes, toxic families, or simply felt like they didn't belong. Teaching them wasn't just about skills or jobs, it was about teaching them resilience, how to stand up for themselves, how to carve out space in the world, and, most importantly, how to recognize their own worth. Watching them succeed gave me a sense of purpose I had never anticipated. Every smile, every achievement, every moment of self-confidence they gained was a reflection of my own journey. I realized that I was creating a family of choice, the one I had always longed for. One unexpected twist came when my sister attempted to reconcile. She sent a long email, carefully worded, full of apologies for the past and promises to do better. Part of me wanted to read it with the old feelings of hope and longing, The part of me that had once wanted approval so badly it hurt to breathe without it. But I didn't. I recognized the pattern for what it was. Control dressed as reconciliation. I didn't need her validation anymore. I had outgrown the need for their approval. Instead, I focused on the life I was building. The cafe became more than a business. It became a community hub. People came not just for pastries, but for guidance, mentorship, and support. I held workshops on financial literacy, cooking, and personal development. Teenagers who reminded me of myself were finally learning how to navigate the world without being diminished by others. And in seeing them grow, I felt that my past struggles had not been in vain. As the years went on, I realized the most important victory wasn't legal or financial. It was internal. I no longer carried the weight of my parents' judgment or my sister's favoritism. I had cultivated a sense of self-worth that was untouchable by those who had tried to diminish me. I had learned to set boundaries, to protect my energy, and to choose relationships that nurtured me rather than drained me. Then came a quiet revelation. I could forgive without forgetting. I could acknowledge the pain my family had caused me without letting them have a place in my present. It wasn't about absolution. It was about liberation. Each time I released a memory of their neglect, each time I refused to let their words or actions define me, I felt lighter, freer, more alive. By now, I had fully stepped into adulthood on my own terms. I had a home, a thriving business, and a network of people who valued and respected me. I had learned to turn every wound into a lesson, every rejection into motivation. And the most profound lesson of all was this: love and acceptance must be earned, not demanded by blood. True family is those who stand by you when the world turns away. Looking back, I realized the irony. The very people who had tried to push me out, to diminish me, had inadvertently given me the tools to thrive. Their neglect forced me to cultivate resilience, independence, and self-respect. And while I never wished for their cruelty, I could at least acknowledge that it shaped me into someone unbreakable, someone capable of building a life worth living from scratch. Now, when I look at my cafe, my home, or the young people I mentor, I don't see what I lost. I see everything I've gained. The tent in the backyard, the cold nights, the empty meals, the rejection, all of it became fuel. Fuel for determination, for ambition, for self-realization. I had been unwanted once, but I had transformed that unwanted energy into purpose, into action, into life. And so, the boy who had been cast aside at 16 became a man who had everything he needed: self-respect, independence, and a life built on his own terms. I had faced the past, confronted the family that betrayed me, and emerged not just surviving, but thriving. My story was no longer about being unwanted. It was about claiming my place in the world, one step at a time, and refusing to let anyone take it away. Life had a strange way of testing the boundaries of my independence. Even after years of building a home and a business, I found that letting go of the past wasn't just about blocking out my family. It was about confronting the memories that haunted me in quieter, subtler ways. Some nights, I'd lie awake listening to the wind outside, and the shadows on the walls would bring back flashes of that 16-year-old kid in a tent, shivering, hungry, and invisible. The feelings of abandonment and anger would surge, reminding me of all the years I had been overlooked. But now, the difference was clear. I no longer felt powerless. I had tools to protect myself: financial stability, a safe home, and a strong sense of self. I realized that true independence wasn't just about surviving physically. It was about surviving emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. The boy who had once believed he had no worth had grown into someone who knew his value. Around the same time, I began mentoring more young adults and teens, many of whom came from broken homes, toxic families, or simply felt like they didn't belong. Teaching them wasn't just about skills or jobs, it was about teaching them resilience, how to stand up for themselves, how to carve out space in the world, and, most importantly, how to recognize their own worth. Watching them succeed gave me a sense of purpose I had never anticipated. Every smile, every achievement, every moment of self-confidence they gained was a reflection of my own journey. I realized that I was creating a family of choice, the one I had always longed for. One unexpected twist came when my sister attempted to reconcile. She sent a long email, carefully worded, full of apologies for the past and promises to do better. Part of me wanted to read it with the old feelings of hope and longing, the part of me that had once wanted approval so badly it hurt to breathe without it. But I didn't. I recognized the pattern for what it was: control dressed as reconciliation. I didn't need her validation anymore. I had outgrown the need for their approval. Instead, I focused on the life I was building. The cafe became more than a business. It became a community hub. People came not just for pastries, but for guidance, mentorship, and support. I held workshops on financial literacy, cooking, and personal development. Teenagers who reminded me of myself were finally learning how to navigate the world without being diminished by others. And in seeing them grow, I felt that my past struggles had not been in vain. As the years went on, I realized the most important victory wasn't legal or financial. It was internal. I no longer carried the weight of my parents' judgment or my sister's favoritism. I had cultivated a sense of self-worth that was untouchable by those who had tried to diminish me. I had learned to set boundaries, to protect my energy, and to choose relationships that nurtured me rather than drained me. Then came a quiet revelation. I could forgive without forgetting. I could acknowledge the pain my family had caused me without letting them have a place in my present. It wasn't about absolution, it was about liberation. Each time I released a memory of their neglect, each time I refused to let their words or actions define me, I felt lighter, freer, more alive. By now, I had fully stepped into adulthood on my own terms. I had a home, a thriving business, and a network of people who valued and respected me. I had learned to turn every wound into a lesson, every rejection into motivation. And the most profound lesson of all was this: love and acceptance must be earned, not demanded by blood. True family is those who stand by you when the world turns away. I also understood forgiveness in a new way, not forgiveness for their sake, but forgiveness for myself. I didn't need to carry the anger forever. I could acknowledge the hurt, learn from it, and move forward without letting it dictate my life. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about liberation, freeing myself from their influence and claiming my own narrative. Now, standing in my home, looking out at the small community I had helped nurture, I felt an immense sense of pride. I had survived being cast aside, being invisible, and being undervalued. I had not only survived, I had thrived. And that thriving wasn't about possessions or success. It was about self-respect, independence, and the knowledge that I would never allow anyone to make me feel small again. The final lesson was clear. Family isn't always blood. True family shows up, supports you, and lifts you up. The people who matter in life are those who respect and nurture your existence, not those who ignore or exploit it. I had learned this the hard way, but now I lived it every day. And with each passing day, I knew I was building not just a life, but a legacy of strength, resilience, and self-determination. With each passing year, my confidence grew, and so did my ambitions. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted to thrive and create opportunities for others like me. I started looking into real estate investments, buying small properties to rent out, all while continuing to expand my mentorship programs. Every investment was another step toward independence, another layer of security that no one could take away from me. Along the way, I met people who became my chosen family, friends, colleagues, and mentees who respected me and shared my vision. I realized that love and support weren't limited to traditional family bonds. I didn't need the people who once hurt me to validate my existence. Instead, I surrounded myself with those who genuinely cared and contributed positively to my life. One afternoon, a letter arrived, not from my parents or sister, but from a local youth center. They'd heard about my mentorship program and were inviting me to speak at an event about resilience and overcoming adversity. I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Standing in front of those young faces, I shared my story, not to seek sympathy, but to show them that no matter how hopeless things might seem, it was possible to rise above. Their reactions were humbling. Teens who had been overlooked or dismissed found hope in my words. I realized that my experiences, painful as they were, had equipped me with empathy and insight that few could understand without living through similar struggles. I had transformed my hardships into tools that could help others navigate their own challenges. Despite the growth and success, there were still moments when memories of my past crept in. The cold nights in the tent, the dismissive words of my parents, the feeling of invisibility. But now, those memories served a different purpose. They reminded me of my resilience, of the person I had become, and of the determination that had fueled every achievement. I also learned to embrace vulnerability. Sharing my story publicly and mentoring teens required a level of openness I had never experienced before. But vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was power. It allowed me to connect, inspire, and foster genuine relationships. For the first time, I felt the freedom to be fully myself, without fear of judgment or rejection. As the years went on, I expanded my initiatives further. I established scholarships for underprivileged youth, partnered with local businesses to provide internships, and even opened a small cafe that doubled as a safe space for at-risk teens. Every success reinforced the fact that I didn't need the people who had once rejected me. I had created my own support system, my own community, and my own path forward. Even when Sarah's family occasionally crossed my radar, I remained detached. The anger that had once consumed me was replaced with indifference. I realized that holding on to resentment only chained me to the past. By letting go of what I couldn't control and focusing on what I could, I gained clarity and peace. Looking back, the tent in the backyard was more than just a symbol of hardship. It was the crucible where my strength was forged. Every night spent shivering, every day spent hustling for survival, every moment of feeling invisible had built a foundation for the life I now led. I had turned pain into purpose, neglect into motivation, and adversity into triumph. Now, when I sit in my own home, surrounded by the life I built from scratch, I feel an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. Not because I proved my parents wrong, but because I proved to myself that I could endure, adapt, and flourish despite everything. I had achieved something far greater than wealth or property. I had achieved self-mastery, independence, and inner peace. The final lesson of my journey is simple. No one can define your worth but you. No one can dictate your future if you refuse to let them. Life will throw challenges at you, sometimes in the form of family, sometimes through strangers, but your response defines your path. I chose resilience, action, and self-respect, and that choice changed everything. Now I continue to live intentionally, helping those who need guidance and seizing opportunities that once seemed impossible. My past shaped me, but it no longer confines me. I am free, empowered, and fully in control of my own narrative. And with that freedom, I finally understand the true meaning of family, belonging, and self-worth. Years later, I found myself reflecting on just how far I'd come. The teenager who once huddled in a freezing tent was now leading a life filled with purpose and independence. I'd built more than a home. I'd built a foundation for my dreams, a network of people who believed in me, and a legacy of resilience I could pass on to others. One evening, while closing up the cafe I had opened for teens, a young girl approached me nervously. She reminded me of myself at 16, scared, overlooked, and desperate for guidance. She hesitated before asking, "Do you think I could ever get through this?" I knelt to meet her eyes. "You're already stronger than you think. It's not about what people do to you. It's about what you do with what happens to you." In that moment, I realized the true power of my journey wasn't the house I'd bought, the businesses I'd started, or even the money I'd earned. It was my ability to transform my pain into purpose and inspire others to do the same. Everything I had endured, the neglect, the favoritism, the rejection, had prepared me for this moment. Occasionally, news of Sarah or my parents drifted my way, but I felt nothing like the anger that had once consumed me. Instead, I felt detached, almost pitying. They had spent their lives chasing the illusion of control and perfection, while I had spent mine building reality and resilience. They had shown up too late to be part of my story, and I didn't need them to validate my life anymore. I also found a sense of closure through the small acts of generosity I could give back. Scholarships, mentorships, community programs. They weren't about recognition or gratitude. They were about making sure no other kid felt invisible or expendable the way I once had. Each success, each life touched, was a proof that I had reclaimed control over my narrative. One crisp morning, I walked through my neighborhood, passing by familiar streets and memories that once felt suffocating. The old bakery where Frank had given me my first chance, the library where I'd researched ways out, even the parks where I'd taken odd jobs to survive. They all told the story of a transformation. Not just of my circumstances, but of who I had become. I understood now that adversity wasn't just a trial. It was a teacher, and I had learned every lesson it offered. I had learned self-reliance, patience, and courage. I had learned that love and support could come from unexpected places, and that family wasn't defined by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and care. Most importantly, I had learned that I alone determined my worth. As the sun set over my neighborhood, I stood on the porch of my house, looking out at the life I had built. The peace I felt wasn't temporary, it was earned. The future was still unwritten, but for the first time, I faced it with complete confidence. I knew I could handle whatever came next, not because life would be easy, but because I had survived the impossible and come out stronger. No longer was I the overlooked, unwanted kid in the background. I had become someone who mattered, someone capable of shaping my own destiny. And that, above all else, was the victory I had fought for. I finally understood what it meant to be free, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. Free from the judgments, expectations, and manipulations of those who had once claimed to love me. Free to build a life that honored my values, my ambitions, and my worth. Looking ahead, I felt a sense of excitement rather than fear. I had dreams to chase, people to help, and a life to continue building. I had transformed survival into success, pain into purpose, and neglect into empowerment. Every step I took forward was a declaration that I was no longer defined by my past, but by the strength, resilience, and determination I carried into the future. And in that moment, I finally smiled, not the forced smile of a neglected child, but the confident, unshakable smile of someone who had claimed their life, their home, and their self-worth. Looking back, I realized that the hardest moments, the tent, the cold nights, the constant feeling of being invisible, had all been necessary. They shaped me into someone who could not only survive, but thrive, who could take control of a life that had once felt impossible to manage. I had learned to set boundaries, to recognize my own value, and to never let anyone else dictate my worth again. Now, standing in my home, I felt a sense of peace that had been foreign to me for most of my life. I didn't need approval, validation, or acceptance from the people who had once dismissed me. I had created my own family in the people I chose to surround myself with, in the lives I could touch, and in the legacy I was building. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew I was ready for them. I was fully in charge of my life, my choices, and my future. I wasn't just existing anymore, I was living, truly living, on my own terms. And that was the life I had fought for, and finally, the life I had claimed.